Hi everyone, this is Shane Diffley. I hope you can hear me. If anyone has any problems with audio, just send me a chat message and I'll see what we can do to get it sorted out. But good afternoon anyone. So I've been asked by Site Improve to talk about the topic of web governance and describe a number of simple steps for helping you to start and improve how you manage online. Before we get into that, I just want to introduce myself. So my name is Shane Diffley. I'm a consultant and specialist commentator on the discipline of web governance. That's my website there. If you'd like to go there, you can get lots of free downloads and useful insights for web governance, including a free copy of my book, The Website Manager's Handbook. Also, you can follow me on Twitter. That's my Twitter handle, and I post a few times a week. And finally, if you like what you hear today and you want to learn some more, well, you can come along to my Web Governance Masterclass, which is being held in London in a few weeks. I'll be going over the topics from today and a lot more in a much greater detail. If you want to find out more about the Masterclass, just go to my website at diffley.com. Basic aim of the masterclass is to address many of the real-world problems that are holding web teams back, such as disputes about online ownership, leadership, and authority, and also how to create a web team with clear roles and responsibilities. And that's especially in organizations that rely on the common distributed content publishing model. The focus of the masterclass will really be on equipping you with hands-on deliverables so you can make real change when you get back to the office. And that includes giving you a complete web governance toolkit that contains fully editable examples of common online policies and standards. And if you hang on to the end of the presentation today, I'll also be giving away a free ticket using a special discount code. It'll be first come, first served, so make sure you have your fingers at the ready. Anyway, let's get on with the presentation. So I've been asked to provide an overview of web governance and describe a number of simple steps you can follow to start improving the way you manage online. Now, as you may be aware, the concept of web governance is currently attracting a lot of attention. It seems as if its moment has finally arrived, which is encouraging because until recently, few industry commentators or senior managers were much interested in the details of managing a website. The reason was there were just too many other problems that needed fixing first, like getting the basics of usability right, implementing accessibility, or improving content. And while we must admit that work remains to be done in these areas, many of the fundamentals have been put to bed. As a consequence, attention is now shifting to how such tasks and the resources needed to support them are managed. This shift to web governance highlights a realization that if the trajectory of online experience is maintained, a more professional approach to operations is needed. Indeed, disciplines like design and content are now so widely understood that they're being kind of gradually exhausted as differentiators. This means that the way in which they're managed over time is becoming progressively more important to creating and maintaining value. So in the future, all things being equal, those who are best at online will really be those who are best at online management, simply because they'll be able to react more quickly to events and to deliver consistently higher quality at a lower unit cost in a predictable way. So it's more than just a matter of timing or convenience that web governance is now getting a lot of attention, kind of floating to the top of people's agendas. The reason is that in future, your competitive advantage in many ways is going to rely on it. And that's the good news. But there is, of course, some bad news to go with it, because when basic issues like code and design and content and others grabbed all the attention, it was kind of easy to ignore inefficiencies in management. But that's no longer the case. The new level of analysis on web governance and the range of tools that are available to do that, like those from Site Improve, are kind of pulling back the curtain and revealing the ungodly mess that's been covered up for so long. Indeed, lots of organizations are only now discovering just how poorly organized and precarious their web operations have been. To set things right then, they need a new system of online control, one that can create order from complexity and re-establish operational stability to help secure the web governance advantage that's going to become so important in the future. So anyway, I guess a good place to start in this discussion is to define exactly what we mean by the term web governance. In fact, an interesting aspect of the whole debate about web governance, and you see this a lot on blogs and on various commentator sites like Gartner and Forrester, is that there's no commonly accepted definition for this term. The problem is that it's so flexible and so malleable that, just like the old joke, if you ask 10 different managers to describe it, you're likely to get 11 different answers. It's how we make decisions, it's about operations, it's how we set strategy, or it's how we do, kind of stuff about, operations and managing, and it's kind of very indistinct. I think part of the issue is that for a long time, web governance was used as a catch-all for just about any operational problem on a website. As a result, it came to mean different things to different people. For example, if you had interpersonal issues on your team, governance was all about roles and responsibilities. On the other hand, if your challenge was establishing online direction, For you, governance is probably about leadership and strategy. So in short, governance is to be defined, not in any unified way, but as a kind of catch-all for the many disparate elements connected with running a website. And this type of fuzzy thinking isn't new. Remember how we used to define the term web governance? Well, depending on who you talk to, it meant everything from graphic design to user experience to the process of design itself, and a lot more besides. But as we now know, design is not a single thing. Instead, it encompasses a wide set of activities, skills, and other elements that together add up to a discipline called design. The same is true of web governance. Web governance is not a single activity. There's no solitary document, organizational structure, or set of standards you can point to and say, there, that is my web governance. Rather, it's a system that unites many disparate elements connected with online operations and allows them to be managed in a cohesive way. With that in mind, the definition of web governance I use is that it is a system for managing a website or indeed any other online or digital presence in a controlled and orderly way. The principal benefit of web governance is that it delivers the operational certainty and stability you need so you can focus your effort on pursuing online goals without having to worry about things like inadequate authority, too little manpower, poorly defined roles and responsibilities, etc. One way to think of this is like the well-tuned engine of a car humming away under the hood. In most cases, you barely even notice it's there. In a similar way, web governance or a web governance system that's working is equally invisible. It hums along with the efficiency of skilled staff doing what they're supposed to be doing, that's following effective processes and managing the site. In fact, it might be so good that many outside your team barely even notice web governance is there at all, of course, until things go wrong. Because the truth is, rather than being graceful machines, many systems of online management are the opposite, kind of clunking along and in danger of seizing up at any moment. The reason is that while a decade or more ago, the only thing most teams had to worry about was perhaps a single corporate site, these days even the smallest organization maintains a wide variety of digital presences, including on systems and platforms that they don't even own, such as Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. And these are aimed at a growing assortment of devices from desktop to smartphone and tablet. And of course, each has its own needs for tailored design and content. The problem is that this huge growth in online ambition has not been matched by corresponding growth in the investment needed to make things happen, or more importantly, in the leadership and authority required to support web teams. This has created a huge imbalance in teams and created such classic problems as you can see on screen, unclear roles and responsibilities, unclear processes, issues with distributed content, lack of ownership, lack of tools and budget, etc. What it means overall is that web teams often have to cut corners and bend the rules in an effort to get things done. Indeed, a lot of teams now work so hard and have so little redundancy that one small problem could be all that's needed to bring everything crashing down. For example, if a key staff member on your team were to go on sick leave or some major development required hugely disproportionate attention, important actions in other areas could be postponed or simply overlooked. And over time, then that will snowball and have a predictable impact on quality. Indeed, I frequently point out that this imbalance between online ambition and investment in web governance is in danger of designing failure into online operations, simply because the desire to do more online, that is, to have more content of greater complexity, to generate more engagement, is not being balanced by investment in people and skills and processes, and in leadership and authority to make things happen. And of course, the real impact is felt beyond just kind of these technocratic ideas of operations. For example, poor web governance often leads to very high staff turnover because people just become dissatisfied and unhappy because of the huge demands being placed on them, so they leave for, I guess, more balanced jobs elsewhere. That in turn creates unhappy users because staff who are under pressure tend to create a lot more errors in content, simply because they have so much to do and so little time in which to do it. And finally then, this impacts at a very high level because such errors can and do put the entire online reputation and earnings of your organization at risk. So you might recognize a lot of things that are familiar in this situation, but don't despair because a lot of teams are in the same place and are going through the same journey and facing the same set of problems on their own path to better web governance. And indeed, it is useful to think of this process as a path or a journey. Having worked with many organizations, I now visualize governance as made up of about 3 steps, which taken together typify how institutions, and often we as web professionals, evolve in stages towards an ever better implementation of online management. What happens is that step 1, your organization, and perhaps you as its incumbent manager, are exposed to web governance as a unifying concept for the first time. The focus here is simply on learning what web governance is about and preparing the ground for transformation. By the time you get to step 2 then, you pretty much know everything you need in order to make better governance put better governance in place, and you can start to identify the manpower, skills, etc. required to rebalance operations and impose stability. And finally, when you get to step 3, you're in a happy position of being able to create a governance system that's kind of broadly right for you. That is, you have the right people in the right roles, the right tools, and the right budget to support everything, with few distractions like role conflict or inattentive leadership to undermine activity. Of course, different industries progress at different rates along this journey, and even within industry there is expected to be a wide range of maturity. But such things aside, that kind of broad trajectory of 3 steps is seen across the board. So now let's start to investigate each of these steps to see how you can use them to impose stability on your own operations. So we'll start at step 1. I guess at step 1 our first action must be to impose order on the often confusing complexity of the many things connected with managing a website. Indeed, part of the reason why web governance becomes so confused and out of kilter is that there are so many things involved with managing a modern online presence. It's often hard to get a hold of everything, or even know where the boundaries lie. Indeed, as my own definition of web governance makes clear, this area is very, very broad. It includes everything to do with managing online presence. And I do mean everything. That's every action that's done and every resource you need in place to support it. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that you yourself need to be an expert in all these things or you need to expedite them all. That's why you hire a web team. But you do need to know what these elements are, and if you're a web manager, you also need to know, well, just about enough so you can ask the right questions of your staff in order to prevent the wool being pulled over your eyes. Now, my own research suggests, and probably your own experience too, is that differences of strategy and emphasis aside, the really interesting thing about the operations of web governance is that the same broad categories of activity occur on pretty much all sites, no matter how big or small they are or what they're about. And they tend to be supported by the same categories of resourcing too. Indeed, it's these commonalities that help me develop a new conceptual model to help with order and complexity and provide a starting point for the governance journey. So what you see on screen here is the new framework of web governance. So this framework describes everything you need to plan and build a more balanced system of operations in order to deliver the stability that web governance promises. This framework has been developed over the last about 10 years and is now used by a lot of organizations in sectors like government, retail, and higher education. The useful way to think about this model is like a conceptual model and similar to other things like the 4 Ps of marketing or Porter's 5 forces. In other words, it simplifies what could otherwise be an impenetrably complex array of factors into a single straightforward construct. And alongside that, it also has predictive qualities, and as we'll see, can serve as a starting point when planning your journey to better governance. The framework itself consists of 3 basic elements, of which the first 2 are, at the top, we have the 4 primary activities of governance. In summary, these describe everything you must do in order to manage your website effectively. And at the base, we have the 4 pillar resources. These describe everything you must have in place in order to expedite the above activities. As I mentioned before, the good thing is that the same activities and resources apply to all websites, no matter how big or small they are or what they're about. The only thing that changes is that the granularity and sophistication by which they are expedited increases as you grow over time. A little bit more about that in a few minutes. In terms of detail, we'll flick through each of the activities now and the resources. So you can see that each of the 4 activities and the 4 resources are composed of a series of sub-elements, of which there are about 22 in total. If you like, you can download an A3 size poster of this model on my website under the heading Downloads. In essence, the 4 resources and the 4 activities and the sub-elements from which they're composed act as kind of like bucket categories for organizing operations and online management. In summary, everything you need to do or have in place to run your website, whether from managing day-to-day publishing, or indeed the tools you need to support that, like CMS or SiteImprove's QA tool, has a home in one of these 2 elements. As such, this model allows you to both understand and explain the full extent of your online operations, which can be quite useful when you're trying to get senior management on board in order to get them to invest in web governance. And of course, it helps you reimpose order on things. And by doing that, it also allows you to isolate critical gaps or shortfalls in operations, which leads us on to step 2 of the web governance journey. So once you've been able to impose order on the confusing array of online operations, our next step is to see if there's anything important that's missing or being overlooked. To this end, an audit of governance is useful. The purpose of your audit is to expose gaps in how things should be done versus how they are actually being done in order to identify areas where investment is needed. Now, a complete description of how to conduct a web governance audit is available on my site, but in simple terms, it's first you check each activity and each task within those activities to make sure they're being done on a timely basis to the right level of quality and granularity. And second, you check the resources to make sure that everything you need in place to support those activities, including manpower, skills, procedures, and tools, are available to the requisite level of sophistication. Really what you're looking for is anything that's indicative of a misconfigured governance system. For example, things like online indicators might indicate that, if you've got poor online quality, it means that people aren't carrying out tasks, or if there's operational indicators, so you're not delivering on a timely basis at the right level of cost for internal stakeholders, or at an organizational level, maybe we're finding that we can't deliver on our online goals without investment that's way over what was originally planned. So these three indicators allow you to establish what the level of effectiveness and stability of your web governance system is. As you can see on this slide, these indicators can be both quantitative and qualitative. For example, poor online experience can be tracked using measures like numbers of spelling errors or broken links, as well as subjective indicators like the tone of feedback from users. Of course, if something goes wrong in any of these areas, it doesn't necessarily mean that something is wrong with web governance or that web governance is to blame. It could be that your team is working fine or processes are fine, but perhaps your internal customers are very demanding and they're constantly coming late to you, which means that you can't deliver the requisite level of quality. Or it could be that staff are dissatisfied, not because the governance setup is wrong, but you have like a bad canteen or ugly offices or whatever else it is. But all things being equal, these indicators do provide a standard of what stability should look like and kind of act as an early warning system for problems in web governance. I'm sure as many of you know, perhaps one of the most reliable indicators of poor governance is problems with people. So if you do see things like evidence of low morale, high turnover in staff, or interpersonal tension, perhaps due to people working on a team with inadequate manpower or poorly defined roles, that's really telling of a dysfunctional governance system. Indeed, it's perfectly possible to have a governance system that delivers excellent online experience with really good internal operations, but off the back of a caustic work environment. I mean, I've worked in organizations on projects where they've had great online quality, great internal operations, but they just simply can't hang on to staff because they're being put under so much pressure that they just don't like working there, so they eventually leave. So that's a really good indicator that governance is out of kilter. Anyway, once you know what gaps you need to fill in and what quality issues you have, you can begin to plan a new system of governance. As I already mentioned, as well as putting order and complexity, a good conceptual model should also have predictive qualities to serve as a starting point when planning better governance. In this way, the framework we've looked at not only allows you to rationalize and audit the elements of web management, but also has some predictions that it can make about it, based on a measure of what we call the scale of your management burden. Now, scale is the third element of the web governance framework and lies at the heart of the model. What scale essentially attempts to do is to determine how onerous your online management is using three metrics of size, complexity, and levels of engagement that you can see defined on screen. Basically, the way it works is that the larger the scale of your site, that is, the bigger, busier, and more complex you are, the more detailed become the various activities, and therefore the more sophisticated must be the resources required to support it. Putting these measures together then allows you to forecast at a basic level what type of governance you'll need, including how many people, what type of skills, tools, and budget. Now, a question that often comes up is, well, why these three measures? Why not other measures? Or indeed, why not more measures? Well, firstly, it's limited to three for reasons of simplicity. A conceptual model is not really supposed to represent all of reality. Its purpose is merely to give you a steer, a structure, a starting point to help guide your thinking. Of course, more parameters could probably be added to the model. As a matter of fact, I recommend that you bring as much impact or as much insight to bear as you can when planning a governance system. Some things I routinely include as well are things like, well, the scale of localization, that is, how many territories you operate within, how many languages you use on your different websites, and of course, your online ambition. Because it's no good designing a management system for your online presence as it exists today. If your ambition is to double in scale, for example, over the next 12 months, you need to know that now in order to plan things like numbers of people, tools, technology, etc. Nevertheless, the three parameters do provide a solid baseline for predicting the overall shape of governance because of the direct influence they have on the management burden. That's reflected in the way each matches a major part of operations. For example, the factor of complexity is generally representative of everything connected with the technical foundations of a site and technology, including hosting, content technology, software and tools that you use, and any other IT. The parameter of size embodies the content layer. That is all the things you need to do to create content for online and make it available to intended audiences. And finally, we have the engagement layer, which stands for how a website is used, shared on Facebook or Twitter, and otherwise interacted with by visitors, including things like feedback. So by triangulating from these three parameters, you can actually produce quite good estimates about the governance needed to support an online venture. For example, if we discover that a site is large in scale, we know pretty much instantly the granularity of its operational activity will be very high, and it will therefore require very sophisticated governance resourcing in order to support it. This includes a large headcount, specialist skills, well-defined roles, formal team structures, tools, a bigger budget, and everything else that goes with it. Indeed, my own experience of sites in the UK tends to suggest that many mid to large-scale web teams weigh in at about maybe 12 to 15 full-time equivalents. Though, of course, some sites are so big and busy and complex that they might have dozens of people involved. Nevertheless, your challenge is, no matter how many people are on your team or how many full-time equivalents, because again, we need to bear in mind that not everybody who's involved with managing a website may be on your own team. You need to configure these people and these relationships into a system of management that can adequately cope with the demands that are being placed on you. And that brings us to the third step of our journey. So as you can see on screen, it's kind of like an idealized structure for an online team and demonstrates many of the features commonly seen across the board. Of course, the configuration of governance that's suitable for you, that is how you arrange your people into teams and clusters of skills, will be dictated by the circumstances of your own organization. That's how things have been done in the past, the size, the culture, and particularly in politics and its ways of doing things. Nevertheless, a typical mid to large scale site will demonstrate many of the following features in that approximate size of about 12 to 15 full-time equivalents. Leadership and team structures might be as shown. So you have a senior management team which sets strategy. That's then devolved to a senior executive in a department, which may be IT, communications, or corporate affairs. Although I also recommend that we have some kind of collegiate decision-making group, which I define here as a web steering group, which brings everybody together in order to make decisions and set priorities. The reason being that if one department, for example, IT, owns web operations, the danger is they can focus on their own objectives as opposed to the entire organization's goals. The purpose of the web steering group is to provide this forum where everyone can field their views and come to a collective collegial decision about what should be done. We also see that we get common clusterings of skills in things like code, design, and content. And then they're all supported by tools like CMS, QA, analytics, and a lot more besides. In fact, one of the clearest trends in web governance in recent times has been the huge growth in online tools available to web managers to help support their online operations. Like this is particularly welcome on very large-scale sites because in the past, as sites have grown in scale, web managers have become increasingly distant from the core face of operations. Simply because there's so much going on and there's so much complexity, it's very hard to understand the effect of your governance decisions and what actually happens on the site or in other parts of your governance configuration. But what's happening now with web tools is that things like Site Improves tool, combined with CMS, combined with analytics, combined with editorial content trackers and many other things, allows you to track the audit trail between, okay, I make a decision about where to invest my limited resource, and then I can see the output by my dashboards that I create from combining insight from many different tools. And that's really one of the best things that's been happening in governance in the last couple of years. Anyway, in terms of configuration of governance and the people involved, the clearest trend in recent years has been towards the centralization of online activity. This has been noted by a leading expert at Capgemini called Didier Bonnet. Now, he mainly looks after high-level digital governance and transformation, but it's also relevant to web. And he says that silo-based organizations centered on organizational units are coming under pressure to change. And indeed, we do see that happening. So some great examples of how governance is starting to, I guess, mature and be done better are particularly seen in places like universities, higher education. So RMIT in Australia have done some amazing work, as have Harvard. And then also in government. And probably the best example of recent years has been the UK government, which I'm sure you're aware of, and its own GDS team. So since 2012, the UK government has been centralizing hundreds of state bodies and ministerial departments into a single online presence. Now what happened was at the very beginning of this endeavor, a key decision was made regarding centralization, leadership and authority at the insistence of the project initiator, Marceline Fox. So she said, we need to appoint a new CEO for digital with absolute authority over the user experience across all government services. And you should really note the use of the words absolute authority. So she knew that the change she was recommending would be doomed in the absence of the leadership and support and the ability to make things happen that she needed. So she was thinking that, look, I don't want to get into a situation where a minister or some working group or committee can come along and make me change how I do things. No, I need to get from the very highest level to say, no, Martha, your team, they look after the online experience. So whatever decisions you make are decisions we're going to go with. And to its credit, the British Cabinet, the Cabinet gave her what she wanted. And a lot of organizations around the world, including governments in places as diverse as Australia, New Zealand, and the US, are using it now as a baseline for their own reconfigured web governance. Of course, the thing is that such idealized structures may be not suitable for you because maybe you're in the process of transition. It's going to take you a while to get to a situation where you can create maybe a centralized digital unit. Nevertheless, there are still things you can do in the meantime to stabilize governance. In particular, you should ensure your web team can operate as independently as possible, outside of the control of any one department. Now, if that's not possible, what you do is you create a web steering group, as I already suggested, where you can meet regularly, perhaps, well, about 4 times a year, so once every quarter is usually appropriate. Everyone can field their views. You decide on a list of priorities. And then it also acts as a kind of court of last resort. So if there are any disputes between different departments about what should be done online, everyone can air their views there and you come to some form of decision. Not only that, but you should also, not only should you have like these centralized decision-making bodies, but also you should start to approach your senior management to make sure that they can devolve leadership and authority to you. So just like what happened with Martha, one of the key levers for success, as she mentioned, and it's something that she repeats again and again if you watch any of her videos on the gov.uk site, is that by getting leadership on the very highest level, enabled her to make the change that she needed, and then to deliver on the promise of governance, which was improved quality, more productivity, reduced risk, and of course, greater stability. And that really brings us to the end of the 3 steps of the web governance journey. So I'm hoping you get some out of that. I guess supposed to suggest somewhere to start would be, well, just start to apply the web governance framework to your own operations. Maybe use it to recategorize or rethink how you understand those operations, and then start to do an audit. Say, okay, well, this is how I do things at the moment. What can I do different in the future? And then lastly, I promised that there was going to be a free ticket to my web governance masterclass. So if you have your fingers at the ready, the free discount code is, and this is going to be for 1 ticket for the 25th of November in London. That's the discount code GOLD. So if you want to go to my website, you find out more about the masterclass there, and you can book your ticket. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to pop them into the chat box now, and I'll hang on for a few minutes. Otherwise, feel free to drop off when you're ready. Okay, I don't see any questions coming in, so we'll close the webinar. Thanks very much for your attendance. I'll be publishing the slides from today on SlideShare later on, so go there if you'd like to download them. And of course, feel free to follow me on my Twitter handle at Diffley for pretty much regular daily updates on web governance issues. Thanks for coming.